So thank you people for coming. Brennen, stand up.
Hi.
All right, so in case you didn't know, this is the JavaScript Meetup. Okay, I don't see any upcoming stuff. I don't know if that's something broken on this page, or are there any scheduled?
Tommy Truong, the host of the web meetup,
Yep.
and I are trying to team up to coordinate some Git workshops for next month.
Okay.
So we're trying to figure out how to actually present that on the meetups.
Gotcha. Okay, so a Git workshop
Yep.
for the JavaScript Meetup next month. In 2 weeks, I'm excited. We've got Lisa Crispin is going to be presenting for the DevOps Meetup. That's going to be back here, right?
Who's
I think you got
Lisa?
me.
Yep.
Lisa is a speaker who does a lot of stuff around the world-ish, and she's going to be presenting to us. And we've got the WordPress Meetup coming up. Looks like they're focusing on the dashboard. I'm assuming that's the admin dashboard stuff. And then Demo Night is always a good time. That's in 3 weeks. Okay, I need my hand. Thank you. All right. Oops. And so Brennen and I are going to be presenting on making browser games with Phaser. And so I'm Brennen Thiede. I'm a DevOps engineer, and I really enjoy empowering teams, teaching people, and simplifying best practices. The way that I like it being said is a few people I've heard say, you want to make people fall into the pit of success. And so that's my goal in life, try to make things as easy as possible to do the right thing. Okay, Brennen?
I'm Brennen. He's my dad. I'm in 3rd grade, and I go to Mason. And I like acting, and I do First Lego League, and that's where you program like robots to do different challenges. And I like Harry Potter,
Yeah.
which is why I made the game.
Yep. Yeah, and so the game that Brennen and I did is this.
It's at -1,000, Dad.
Yeah. Okay, show how you do it.
So you have to get the suns and try to avoid the Dementor. Oh no! Otherwise it takes points from you. And it'll say you leveled up when you get to that 1,500, I think, to go on to level 2.
I think you gotta get to 2,000 to level up again.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was something where Brennen and I wanted to try to do something together, some programming stuff. Didn't put a whole lot of time into it, in case it wasn't obvious. And so I wanted to teach Brennen about programming concepts, but and originally I thought, oh, well, I can totally do this with vanilla JavaScript, right? Like I'm a competent programmer. I can, create an event loop and do all this stuff, but that was a lot more difficult than what I thought. Like I got to the point where I was trying to deal with keyboard inputs and trying to make it where, you could press a button or hold the button, but then when you let go, it would actually stop doing what it had been doing. But I was behind on my event loop and stuff like that. So it proved to be a lot more difficult than what I thought it would be. But another cool thing about this was just getting the chance to have Brennen take apart a problem. Because programming, in a lot of ways, is about trying to take these very complex, very abstract ideas and split them apart into these very, very stupid little sentences. Computers are very dumb. They only understand a very small amount of words. And so to try to break problems apart into that is, a lot of fun for me. That's why I enjoy programming. But games are a lot of the same types of things. So, Brennen, why don't you describe kind of what the game was at first?
So it was just a thing. We had clouds, and then when we got back on a few months ago, it didn't have the clouds. So It started out just like sun's hippogriff, and then it was just like you could like kind of play around with it, and then we added the Dementor, and that made it a bit harder. So that way, like, it gave the game like more of a challenge. And then we started making the levels and times that you had. So, like I said, the Dementors take away points, and the Suns give you points. I think it's like 5 points each.
Something like that.
I think it's 6 points each.
Well, we could actually look when we show the source code later on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the Hippogriff tries to avoid the Dementor, and you have 2 minutes. And I got to level 10. Each 1,000 you level up. And when you level up, it has a screen that says, oh yeah, you completed level 1, or you completed level 5, like whatever level you just completed.
Yeah, but that was something where when Brennen first thought of the idea, it was just, yeah, I want levels. I'm like, okay, describe a level to me. And I was kind of intentionally being dense about it, like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Trying to be like, oh, well, if there's, so like right now, it's basically all level is just a calculation and a counter, But we did talk about, the idea of, well, if you want, a level to increase in a game, normally you have some sort of, increase in difficulty or something like that, or maybe you unlock different abilities. And so those are things we had to start talking about, like, what does it mean? Because originally it was just, I want levels. Okay, well, what would be the impetus for going up a level? What do you have to do? Do you have to, collect a certain number of things? Do you have to, avoid a certain number of things or something like that? And so it was interesting to get her to kind of take the problem space apart and think about, what it actually meant. Now we didn't end up doing a lot of the things that we talked about wanting to do. We kind of made a list and started to talk about, what it means to prioritize and iteratively do things so it's not broken in between, step 1 and step 10. We want to be able to do one little thing, improve it, be able to still have it working and then keep going. But yeah, we've been focusing a lot on the first LEGO League. Their tournament for that is actually this Saturday, so we've been focusing a lot on that. Actually, the rest of the team is practicing programming the robot right now.
Some of like the things we had come up with, like to make the levels like kind of harder, is like having more Dementors, so they could like split up. And then we had talked about like things that could help the Hippogriff. And one of the things was like, if you collect so many suns on a level, then you could like get a speed booster. Or like if like you got to one of the harder levels, which we haven't made yet, where like there's like multiple Dementors, like you could make the Hippogriff like multiply. So then the Dementors would get like confused, and you could get like more suns.
Okay, so any questions about the game itself? I think you could see, it's got decent, smoothness of, the movement around and stuff, just through, right now all it is cursor input, that's all it's doing. But there's a lot more you can do with Phaser, and so we'll talk about some of those things. And so, yeah.
I think Brennen mentioned something about clouds in an early version. What were the clouds?
Yeah, so the clouds were actually, I think that was when we were using, that's a good segue here. That was with Phaser 2. When I first did that, it was a little more DOM-like, some of the stuff. It was and it was also a flatter representation of things. And so yeah, I just had some CSS in there, or it's just, oh yeah, make these clouds and have, you know, kind of multiple layers of them so they're moving by at different speeds to give that kind of like parallax effect. But that wasn't using anything native to Phaser, that was just using some CSS. But when we migrated to Phaser 3, that was a very, very different model. So it was basically a rewrite at that point in time, the way that we chose to do it. And so you might ask, why? Well, for one, we hadn't invested that much into the game, so it was not like a major, you know, undertaking to rewrite it. But some history on it, you know, there was Phaser 1 that the creator, who goes by Photon Storm on GitHub, I forget his actual name, but he wrote a blog post where he was just like, oh yeah, here's this thing, Phaser, that I've created. And then that eventually became Phaser 2, and then he decided sometime a few years back that he wanted to do a rewrite. He wanted to change a lot of things, you know, create more of an object-oriented approach to some of the stuff, more of a data-driven approach to how you create things. And so he decided he was going to rebuild it from scratch. But at the same time, he didn't want to stop people from contributing to Phaser 2, so he kind of opened it up as a community project. So it is a little confusing sometimes when you search for Phaser stuff. Like, make sure you search for Phaser 3 or Phaser CE, because Phaser CE stands for Community Edition, as many CEs do. And he, Photon Storm, whatever his real name is, he actually does contribute to that quite a bit. Like, the last commit was his to that repo. I looked earlier today because I wanted to see how many stars there are. Because I think at one point in time, the Phaser CE was more popular than Phaser 3, but now it's not much of a comparison. You know, the Phaser CE has, you know, like a few hundred stars, and Phaser 3 has, you know, tens of thousands of stars on GitHub, and, you know, more contributions and such. But I thought that was kind of a cool approach that he decided he wanted to be able to focus more. So he was just like, yeah, here, community, just you take care of this. And they did a lot of stuff. But Phaser 3 was what we decided to go ahead and switch to, partially because it's the newer one and it's getting, you know, more cool stuff in it. But there were some other things too. I think really the main reason that I wanted it was because of TypeScript. I just had better support out of the box for using TypeScript, because that made it easier for me than trying to look up all the documentation. You know, a lot of stuff you can infer just by, you know, typing in something and then dot, you get the autocomplete, and you're like, oh, it looks like there is a such thing as scale and size or speed and stuff like that. Yes, Brennen?
In the first thing, like the original thing, we had the clouds and we had the Dementors. It was like they would be coming in a row and you had to dodge them. Like, they weren't necessarily like we have it now, like coming at you, but like they had to stay in a row, and you could just like go up and down, dodging them.
Yeah.
So they're moving a little bit smarter now?
Yeah, which is super, super simple. 'Cause, you know, so there are a lot of things built into Phaser 3. One is the rendering. You know, so in general, a game framework is going to give you some sort of rendering, and so this is kind of like, you know, I don't know how early or, you know, how long ago different people in the room would have picked up on jQuery, but I remember when I first used jQuery, I was like, wow, this is magic. Things can actually work in multiple browsers. That's not so much a concern anymore, because, you know, for the most part, you can assume that people will have either, you know, a newer version of Firefox or Chrome, and if they're using IE, just who cares, you know, just leave them in the dust. But, you know, with rendering, there are similar types of concerns. You know, WebGL is not necessarily supported by every browser out there. And so that's one of the cool things that this gives you, is it prefers WebGL, but it'll have a fallback to use the HTML5 canvas. So it does some of that stuff for you. You don't have to worry about that. It also has sprites, so you can do a lot with sprites. You know, if you think of like in CSS, you can have like a sprite sheet, you know, to try to optimize how you deliver images. But sprites in Phaser aren't just images. You can also have sprites for sounds and animations and some other things. And Atlas, for texture mapping and stuff. That's not something we messed with, but it's one of the other things available.
Dad, what's a sprite?
A sprite. So a sprite is a preloaded, hopefully small thing. A lot of times you can. So one benefit of sprites is you can have several images in one image, and then a sprite can be just by taking a small piece of that to have an icon or an image. Yeah. Okay. And physics, you don't have. There's a lot of physics stuff that you get for free. It does some stuff around managing particles. I'll show what I think is a really cool demo that takes like no effort at all. And then tweening, the idea of trying to have something animate, motion between, point A and point B, and you don't have to tell it, okay, I need it to move here, and then a pixel here, a pixel here, a pixel here. Instead, it just does the math and figures out how to make that smooth out. And you can do a lot of different methods for tweening. If you want like a linear movement or a parabolic speed to the movement, stuff like that. And you can set all your different keyframes, that type of stuff. Scaling, if you want to use mobile, it does a lot of that stuff for you. And it's got so Phaser in particular has a really good plugin ecosystem. There's a lot of stuff out there. And then the documentation is phenomenal. So I told you I was going to show the particles. So this is CodePen. I just put one together real quick. So just to show you what it is I've just got a reference to the CDN version of Phaser 3. And I've got just a little bit of code here. And if I run this, and because the screen size changed on me here. But so this particle trail there, that's just kind of for free. The bouncing, the gravity, all that stuff is just built into the framework. And so can you guys see the code here okay? Is that a good size for it? Or should I try to imbigonate?
Is it okay? The lights are off. Gonna say there's
Yeah.
a switch behind you.
Oh,
If you wanted to make it darker, but it looks like that.
yeah, a little bit of glare, I guess. But this is a pretty simple layout for a game, and this is perhaps oversimplified. This is some of the stuff that we did originally with Phaser 2 that I tried to get away with, or get away from when I went to Phaser 3, trying to make things more object-oriented, more structured. But this is just, if you want to throw a single JavaScript file and have it work, it can do it. And so you've got some config here, and this is where we're setting up the type as phaser.auto. So this is where the auto is where it's going to say, I'm going to use WebGL by default. If I can't, I'm going to use Canvas. But if you wanted to use Canvas for some reason, you could force that there. Then you've got your height and your width. This loader here is kind of cool. What it does is it says, when I load assets, you load them from this domain. And so I'm actually stealing stuff from the Phaser Labs to show here. So all these images are just ones that they have available. Then I'm just selecting the physics as arcade. I haven't played around with their other arcades, but there's one that's Matter, one that's Ninja Physics. I don't know what Ninja Physics is. I don't know, does that mean you can all of a sudden just like fly and then not? I don't know.
Jump into the roof.
Yeah. And then, so this is just one block here for the config. Oops. And so it's got definitions here to reference what functions it should run for the preload, create, and update. And we'll get into a little bit more of that, the game kind of event logic. And so then it's just creating a new game, so a new phaser.game, and it's passing in that config. And then I'm just defining those functions that I told it to use for the different parts of the life cycle down here. And so for the preload, that's where you would load in any assets, so you're not trying to load them on the fly, so any images, audio, stuff like that, this is the point where you'd want to do that. And then create is, once it's got all those assets loaded, one time, at the beginning, lay them out. And so we're just saying, so we loaded the image here, now we're saying add an image. And it does a lot of this, which I'm not the biggest fan of. because it is kind of magic texty. You know, you do this kind of keys for a lot of the stuff. So you'll define something and then you'll give a string key, and that's how it's referenced elsewhere. So scenes are referenced that way, assets are that way. We're just saying add an image, you know, that's this size, 400 by 300, and then, you know, we're adding these particles, and so that's just a type of particles, and then we're gonna, on that particle object, we're gonna tell it that we wanna create an emitter, and you can tell it what speed and what size it basically is, and then you can give it different blend modes. So you could, for example, instead of doing add, you could do remove, and stuff like that, so you can kind of invert the colors or anything like that. And then for the image here, we're saying, instead of being, so up here was this dot add image, here we're doing this dot physics dot add image, and so instead of it being just an image that's static, it's going to be able to have different properties on it, like a velocity, and it's going to be affected by gravity. And then the part that I think is really neat looking is just that tail that it gets on it, you know, this little particle emitter. And to do that, it's just this, you know, start follow and tell it what it's going to follow. So it's following the logo, which is the image that says Phaser 3 there. And so it's just wherever it goes, it's just going to stream behind it. And I don't know, I thought that was a pretty cool thing. I mean, it's very little amount of code here. I think that's a pretty neat little effect. You know, I don't know that I'm going to, you know, make my career making bouncing, falling logos, but I thought it was kind of neat. You know, but there's a lot of stuff pretty similar to this on Phaser's website.
Couple questions?
Yeah.
Is that start follow, is that the tweening that you were talking about?
So actually, so there is a very explicit tweening. So that's obviously using some tweening, right? But it's not, you're not directly saying, I want you to, you know, have a start, have a finish, now tween it. So the tweening would be more like, I'm trying to think of examples, like if you have a CSS animation, you say like, here's the start point, here's the end point, you know, how it gets from that start to that finish, that would be the tweening. That would be the responsibility of the tweening. And so for this, yeah, it's definitely using the tweening behind the scenes, but instead of directly saying, this is your start, this is your finish, you're just saying, that thing, follow it. So it's, so you know what I mean? It's kind of an implicit tweening versus an explicit.
So if you had like a catapult and you wanted to animate like a rock or something like that, you would use the explicit tweening?
Yeah, you'd probably do explicit and give it a function for what that tweening would be.
Okay. And then in the code example, were you in a JavaScript class, or was that just a bunch of functions?
These are just functions on that particular one. So this one's not very object-y or anything like that. So these are just functions on the window, like the update, the create, and the preload.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just being defined. Here it has the names to know to actually run those. And obviously it doesn't evaluate this until all the JavaScript is run in, obviously, because otherwise this would have an error right there. Just kind of the order of operation that it's going to be. But the code that I'll show for what we did is actually a little cleaner than that, more of an object-oriented style, because we're using TypeScript, and so it's more structured. But the high-level structure is you have a game, right? So in that example, we had, here's the game. And then you can have scenes. And so scenes are just kind of arbitrary organization. So you can have one or more components, you know, tied to a scene, and you can have multiple scenes. And you can either have those scenes all at once, or you can have them kind of chained together. And you can have some inheritance amongst those. So you can imagine you might have, if you think of like a standard side-scrolling game from the 80s and 90s, you know, if you think of like Mario Brothers or something like that, you might have a base scene where you would define some of the components that are going to be common to all of them. So like maybe, you know, coin blocks and the character, you know, maybe certain other ideas. And then maybe something that inherits that is a water scene, and the water scene would have more types of sprites associated with it, and then you might have a specific scene, or maybe it's just there's different configurations that you pass to that water scene to be able to render your things from there. There's a lot of ways you can do it, and it's really kind of up to your discretion, but I found the scenes, that's a newer concept, that's a new concept in Phaser 3. I thought it was a really cool idea to be able to group things together that way. We tried to use it for like going between like levels, but it didn't click with me how to do that, because the way we were trying to do it, I'm sure there are ways you can do it, but what we were doing was we were losing state as we were coming back, so when we try to restart the main game scene, it would reset everything, and we didn't want that. So it was easier for us just to say, okay, just pop up this text for a minute and then just make it disappear. And then we talked a little bit about the scene control flow. And so within a scene, your constructor is going to happen first, right, as you might expect. And then there's an init function, which is where it'd be a good practice to maybe reset scores, set up any variables you want to use throughout your scene. And then your preload, that's where you're gathering assets. There's nothing to force you to do things in init versus preload, but there is kind of a best practice that's suggested of having just basically setting values in the one and then loading resources in the preload. And then create is going to be where it lays things out. And then once you've created, then you're in the meat of it, which is the update loop, which happens 60 times a second. And so we'll actually show, or actually, yeah, we're going to show now the code that we did. And so we've got, as you might expect if you're familiar with Angular or React or something like that, it's very common that you have on your index HTML, you just have a specially labeled element, and that's where the game itself is going to render. Just for fun, it wasn't how we started, but I decided, I think it was actually a Views on View podcast episode where they were talking about, oh yeah, you could do games and you could have view on the outside and a canvas in the middle. I was like, oh yeah, you could do that. And I didn't end up using view, but I decided, oh yeah, I'll have it communicate with the DOM. So I've got a couple of controls here that are outside of Phaser itself. And then there's the game canvas where it's going to render. And then it's just in my game file, which is kind of the main entry point for this. It's got my config where I'm defining the height and the width. You have to tell it about your scenes here. So as you add new scenes, there is this kind of rote process that you go through where you're going to keep, you create your class and then you append it here to your list. I'm telling it to have things transparent. I think that was actually a result of trying to do the level up scene, which you can see reference to it here, but it's not being used. And we're using just the default physics. And then we're just creating it. So here's just that constructor, very similar to where we saw just the simple single JavaScript file basically approach. It's just initiating the game with the config, and then I'm just adding this listener here so that the window knows about the game itself. So once it loads, it's going to store that as a global variable. And now it's just to make it so that when I do things like click, pause in that outer thing, that it can actually communicate it back in. And then the main scene. So we've got, actually, it might be easier if I show the folder structure for a second. So we've got, within our source, we've got our assets here, which is, as you might expect, just a lot of images, and we've got our CSS. And then we've got our game, we've got our scenes, and we've got our objects. And so the two objects we have are the hippogriff and the Dementor. The suns that you saw popping up, we just have those as part of the scene itself directly. We didn't feel it was super useful to factor those out, but if we were going to have more complex interactions or more types of things, you can imagine very quickly you'd be overwhelmed if you're trying to update all of those in a single file. But in the main file, that's where we're going to reference those objects and bring them in. And so within our constructor, we've got the key. So this is that magic string stuff I was talking about, where you have to have a key to name it. It's kind of weird, especially because standard practice is the name of your file, the name of your class, the name of your key, they're all going to be the same thing. So it's kind of odd to me, but it's just the thing you do. And so you can see we've got the constructor, and then init, we're just setting some scores. I'm actually calling this helper function to update the points, and so that's where it's actually going to draw the score. So it's resetting it and then drawing it that first time. We've got the preload where we're loading in the images. And then on create, this is where we're laying out the food items. And so we're adding them as a group. So that's one of the options you have within Phaser. And then we're setting the rule of when there's an overlap between the player and the food, it's going to call this function of eat food. And so that's a really easy thing. So that the way that you get the points, the way that you're managing that collision detection is just overlap. So very, very simple to set up. And then this is where we've set the countdown timer. So you've got this.time.addEvent. One of the things that you need to pay attention to here is loop. So by default, it is true. We didn't realize that, and we weren't thinking about it. And so we have, once you eat food, you want to have it regenerate the food later on. And so we did that by this.time.addEvent. By default, that's a loop. That is, so it would regenerate the food, and then the next time you eat the food, it would create a new event to regenerate the food, but the other loop was still there. Now it's got a new loop, and then it kept doing that again and again. And so we found out kind of accidentally once, like if you had your hippogriff just sitting on top of a sun, eventually it would just start having more and more, like exponentially more suns regenerating behind it. And so all of a sudden you're just nonstop getting points. And so
Can we show them that?
No, we won't show it right now. Maybe we will if we have time at the end.
Yay!
And this is where, again, we were just setting up this stuff to allow the external DOM to interface with what is going on inside the game. There are a lot better ways you could do it, but this was kind of my quick and hacky way to allow that to happen. And then we've got our basic update loop, where we've just got this simple check of if this.player.isAlive, then keep running the updates. And so the individual objects are where you have these, you can have these update events. And so we're calling the player update, enemy update, and then we're doing a little bit more complex collision detection for the enemy and your player. And so we're doing this geometry intersection stuff instead of just the overlap. We're not actually doing anything complicated here. We could be a lot. The idea was we were going to try to find a shape a little more consistent with the actual image versus just the rectangle. The fact that we didn't do more complicated math, there's really no benefit to doing this way versus the overlap. But if you wanted to have a polygonal type shape to have your collision detection, this is how you'd have to do it. And this is just where it's saying, yep, we're going to take away points for that happening. So that 60 times per second, it's looking to see, are you touching them? Are you touching them? Are you touching them? And if you are, you're going to lose a point. So you could potentially, if you're in constant contact, you're going to lose 60 points per second.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we just have some functions here for toggling the pause state, which is tying that to the action in the DOM, restarting the game, same thing, decrementing the time. I'm trying to see if there's anything super interesting here. Nothing super interesting within this part here, but this is where this is the thing we last added for saying that you leveled up. So this is where we're saying check the score, you know, figure out based on the current level that you're at, you know, have you gotten enough points to move to the next level higher? And then it's just going to do this text element, so it's creating the text, you know, throwing the dynamic value out there based on the level, and then it's adding this event where after 2.5 seconds, it's going to destroy that text. If you've got something where you've got messages popping up a lot, it might be better off to keep the text there and just change the value of it versus, you know, and change the visibility of it versus creating it new, but this worked for now. Yes, and here is the eating food that I was talking about. So here it's, you know, and actually, come to think of it, this is probably a little bit redundant because because it's looking for the intersection, even though the only reason this triggered is because there was that overlap.
We're learning about intersecting lines in class.
Yeah, and these are intersecting rectangles. Yeah. And so we're just saying for the food, disable its body, and then add this event. You know, we're just grabbing a random integer, you know, within this range. You know, so between 2 seconds and 15 seconds, somewhere in there, it will regenerate the food, and that's using this callback scope of this. So it's going to add it to the existing scene, and then loop false. That was the thing that we had to add to not have it just give you ridiculous amounts of points. Yeah. And so the sprite for the hippogriff, that's where it's going to have the logic for how you have it move and stuff like that. So I was kind of debating whether this was a good idea or not, but the scene is where you have that preload action, where we're loading in the image, and then we give it that key, and then we're using that key here in the hippogriff constructor. So that's how it knows what image to use. So it feels a little weird that you're defining the image in the scene, but then using it in the object here, but I'm sure that there are situations where you might want that type of scenario. You know, if you had, so let's say Mario, if he's out in the desert, he's got sunglasses on, and in a water scene, he's got a snorkel. You know, you could control that by the scene and not have to modify the character itself. So I can imagine some situations it felt a little weird in my context, but you know, we're setting this. Well, and that was the other weird thing is you define the image in the scene right now, but then within this class is where you're actually telling it what scale to use and where to set it to initially. And then it has its own update loop. And so within its update loop, we're just looking for, you know, cursors. They have their own special helpers, you know, and it's not that much more difficult to define other keys. It's just cursors.up.isDown. And so that's not like a Led Zeppelin type in through the outdoor type thing, or up is down. It's just saying the key itself is down, not that up means down. So just don't want to mess anybody's heads up there. It's an album by Led Zeppelin.
Who's Led Zeppelin?
Oh, come on. I've been teaching her the wrong stuff. She doesn't even know who Led Zeppelin is.
I know Noah listens to him a lot.
But yeah, so we're just looking for, is the up key pressed but not the down key, you know, and it's not out of bounds, then, you know, change the velocity in the y direction. What?
I restriction.
Okay. And then similarly for, you know, the down keys. And so this was to avoid an issue where if you were pressing both keys at once, it would get very messed up. So we just kind of playing around, we saw, oh, that looks weird. I think it actually got to a state where it just kind of started to glitch and twitch there. So we just decided, well, if you're pressing both, you just don't go anywhere. You know, it's not going to change anything. So your speed would actually just stay what it was. So if you're going left and then press the right key, it'll just kind of keep the speed that it had. or no, actually I take it back. It would stop you because you'd have velocity set to 0 here at the bottom. And then similarly in the horizontal direction. And then to make, well in this guy, so we set his speed as 300 here. And then I'll actually show, I wasn't going to at first, but it makes sense. So the Dementor, we gave him a slower speed, right? So we didn't want to make, if he was the same speed as you, as soon as he's touching you, it's game over. Because we didn't build any like elasticity into his responses. So his movement loop is just, where are you? Wherever you are, I'm gonna just come toward you. And so it's gonna be instantaneously, if you pass over the top of him, he's gonna instantly be following behind you. And so that's just dealing with the axis that it's going to move along. And so that's kind of how, I mean, that's, I think we hit every single file that actually matters for the game to do that. Because the only other things are, you know, the package JSON, you know, the Webpack config, Typescript config, and then the phaser definitions file, which I did find a little bit awkward getting it in here. I would have liked it better if it was just easier to keep it in sync with your packages, but like for you to grab this, I think I actually went out to GitHub and found the releases and had to manually download that file. So if you change your version of phaser that you want to use in your package JSON, you'd have to grab a new file as well. Yeah. We're not talking about Led Zeppelin right now. We'll talk about Led Zeppelin later.
Okay.
Okay.
So where'd you put your tests in?
So,
Oh.
yeah. As it turns out, testing graphics is a little tricky. And so I actually did look into, you know, are there people out there doing unit tests for phaser? For the most part, they're maybe putting unit tests around different functionality, like different calculations of stuff, but like they're not, you know, having it render the game and see, oh, are they colliding here? Are they colliding here? Is it taking away the points? You know, so it's a little more complicated to do that. Now there are a lot of unit tests in the phaser repo, because it's all open source and you can see what they've got. So I was looking at how they were doing some of it, but I definitely got, by the time I got to where I could actually understand, oh, that's what they're doing here, I was already so many layers deep that I was like, I don't know how to have this actually apply back out to what I want, which is a much higher level concept. So yeah, no tests. I know, I feel dirty for it. Very.
You should.
Okay, so I wanted to show some more examples of some of the things that it makes very easy. So this is just, you know, it's that same code as the previous example, except that now I set the velocity to 0, 0, and I set its gravity to 0, so it's just stationary now, except that now in my update loop, you just literally can just, on an image object, you can just say dot angle and change the angle. And the value is in radians, so keep in mind that, you know, 3.14-ish is going to be half a rotation, and then, you know, once you get to 628, it's going to be about a full rotation. So that's another pretty simple thing you can do. And then this, so those were ones that I had done in CodePen. This is actually part of their examples gallery, which is really, really cool. And so I don't know what the editor is they have here, but it's just built right in. And so here's an example. We can see this showing, so they're loading a sprite sheet and just showing different frames within that. And so you can see in the preload over here on the side, it's, instead of being load image, it's loading it as a sprite sheet. And so it has a little bit of information there, knowing that, oh yeah, within this sheet, a single frame is 37 by 45. And so it automatically can do that kind of chunking of, it knows if you want the first sprite out of the sprite sheet, the second, the third, it knows how to do that very easily. So that's one of another cool thing that it does for you. I mentioned that you can do multiple scenes at once. That's actually what they're doing here. So here they've got, and here they're doing it more object-oriented. So this isn't my code, this is their code. And so they've got this class of scene A, which is gonna be loading the images, and then scene B, which has the score. And so here we're loading the two scenes into this example, and the order that you load them in is kind of the layers that they're in. So the first one loaded is in the back, second one you load is in front of that. If you loaded another one, it'd be in front of both of them. And so you have to keep that in mind if you just like if you're layering things in a PowerPoint or anything like that, you gotta make sure you've got the right orders so that what you want on top is on top. And then this one, this is also a good example of showing how this click handler, it's emitting this event of add score. So that's in scene A where it's emitting that score, and then it's down in scene B where it's adding the listener for add score. And so that way I'm able to click here in scene A, and scene B is what's rendering the score. Make sense? And this example is not going to be so easy to see at this resolution, but I thought it was really cool. Actually, I can move this over a little bit. So this is showing how the cameras work. I didn't use cameras for flying the hippogriff, but you can use cameras. And so you can position them different places. And so you've got an image in the background, which is also shown here with the camera. And so I can move it around. I can change the width and the height of the camera, but then you can also do things like scrolling. So I'm scrolling the camera around, and you can zoom it, you can rotate it. And I thought this was kind of neat, just from the perspective of, I remember there being, I think it was, I can't remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure there was a Pokemon game. I remember the game was, essentially you had a window like that and you're moving it around until you found a character, and then you had to take a picture of them. Right? So it was this game where you'd do that and you'd take a picture. And people paid money for that, and you can like write it yourself here. Like it'd be really simple to do this, where it's just on a click event or something like that, you just do some math to figure out, well, what are they pointing at? Are they pointing at the thing they were supposed to? Okay, then give them some points or something like that. So just some more what I find really cool stuff that they show you. And so those last few examples that I showed, they're through this. So this is this is just labs.phaser.io. And they have Phaser 3 examples. They also have Phaser 2 examples. And they've got them categorized by different things. And so I don't even know, what do they consider a game? So here's Canon game. So this might even be what you were talking about, Eric. Like the idea of you have a projectile or something.
Cannon fodder.
Yeah. So let's see what it does.
Boot.json.
Yeah. Did I lose my network connection? That's, oh yeah, the source of the game is boot.json. Why is it not? I'm questioning whether I'm actually connected right now. Okay, it must have been just that thing. But yeah, so here's a breakout game. I remember writing a breakout game on my TA825. I'll bet I did a lot more lines of code than what this has. But you can very easily go to edit, and you've got the view like what I was showing earlier, where you've got all the code it needs over here. So it's under 150 lines of code to be able to write a full breakout game, and then you can just run it right next to you, even if you can't see my paddle. So that's what I've got. Are there any questions about Phaser, what we liked about it, what our process was? Yeah.
I'm a little bit curious about the Webpack part. Was that like a template to start your game, or did you write that stuff from scratch?
I'm trying to remember now. I know I definitely got inspiration, at least from somebody else. I know I tweaked some of it though, but I think I want to say for the most part it was somebody else had a tutorial on getting TypeScript. Like that was how I figured out to dig into the bowels of the GitHub releases to find where the TypeScript definition file was in order to grab it. Here, let's jump back over to it real quick. I haven't even looked at it in a while. Yeah, it's pretty simple. Yeah, there's not much to it there. But, we're just telling it where the actual phaser file is and stuff like that. So it knows how to do that.
I've never used Webpack, so remind me, what's the add?
So Webpack is it's to transpile, right? Because TypeScript can't run directly in the web browser, so it needs to go through Webpack in order to prepare it to be run in the browser. So Webpack ends up creating this dist folder, and within my dist folder, I've got just a single JavaScript file, which has everything in it. So any of the dependencies or anything like that are all thrown into this single file. And so that way, I'm able to create stuff using all these node modules and different dependencies and have it just package everything together as more traditional JavaScript. And you have some control within Webpack as to what your target is. So if you want to target ES5 or ES 2016 or ES6, you have some controls there. And you can even, I know there's some stuff you can do around chunking too if you don't want it to create just a single bundle file. If you want like a couple different ones, because different parts of your website are only going to load certain portions of it, so you can optimize a little bit there. But Webpack is a thing that does that. What's the other one? Parcel? Is that the other? Parcel?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a newer one that's supposed to be zero config. So it's meant to be kind of more convention based. If you follow the convention, it'll just kind of do it automatically. Have you used that one, Eric? I know you talked about trying it out.
Yep, I gave it a try, and it's a lot more opinionated, but basically like if you throw a file in your project that ends in .ts, then it will assume that's a TypeScript file, and it will automatically run all the configuration to turn TypeScript into JavaScript for you.
Yeah, and even with JavaScript, you might use Webpack or Parcel for vanilla JavaScript, because if you're using like newer language features, Webpack can do the work of running it through Babel or something like that to be able to come up with what it needs to be for this particular, whatever your kind of lowest common denominator is. You can stop that. Any other questions?
Question for Brennen. So with your Lego stuff, you're using something that's like, you're clicking around to program the robots, right?
Sort of?
Forgetting
Yeah.
what that's called.
Well, so LabVIEW is the software that they use. Yeah, and that's, I don't know what you're doing, you need to stop. Okay, but that's a block programming language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've got the different blocks.
And this is typed.
Yeah. So you want to tell how you've been doing the programming?
So you can leave, there are different challenges that you,
Well, not for Lego League, talking about for this.
Yeah, because I think this was your first time using programming something where you typed, right?
Technically I didn't type, I told Dad what to do.
Yeah.
For programming?
So it's been more over the shoulder, right? And so that's where it's been fun to kind of play dumb sometimes. Like, you wanted to do what? Oh, so I should do this, and then have her see what that does. It's also interesting, when you structure your code. So creating these variables up at the top for the speed and the scale, is I was able to talk to Brennen about, well, what do you think would happen if we made this number bigger, or if we made this number smaller? Does this make it a better experience or a worse experience? So it's kind of helping her see what are the knobs you can turn, what are the things you can control. But so far, I've not had her actually typing the code so much, other than just changing around some of the variables before. It was just like, here, do something, see what happens.
Okay.
If you wanted to turn this into make an app, a game on, for Android or iOS, would you use Cordova, or you could use? I imagine you could put this in.
Yeah. I know a lot of people use Cordova for it. I'd heard, or I'd seen some stuff around that. That would probably be the best bet, because you're not. I guess it also depends on what type of maybe interactions you want to have with the actual device. If you wanted to, be able to send notifications, about, a lot of games will do that. Like, hey, you haven't played me in like 30 minutes. Don't you want to play and get some bonus points? So, and that would be pretty standard with most any framework that you could wrap around. But the fact that it's just, HTML5, using WebGL, I think Cordova would give you most everything you'd need, because especially if you want the same experience for a laptop as well as your phone. I don't know if you could, I'm just kind of thinking of other use cases. I don't know if you can have accelerometer input come from your phone back to the game. Probably somebody has a plugin somewhere, but I'm not sure exactly how to do it. But yeah, I'd say probably Cordova would be the easiest, kind of that phone gap style.
And you have
Just wrap the browser.
and you have seen that there's a community around like creating add-ons, right?
Yep.
So there's probably somebody out there making add-ons for in-game purchases or
Oh yeah.
ads or whatever.
Yeah, well, we've got our very sophisticated border around ours, which makes it very easy for us, if anybody here wants to contribute, pay us, we'll advertise whatever you want there, we'll put Meg's Talk, like people can get, special Beer City codes, tickets with code Meg in there.
Ooh, I like that
Or
code.
Meg Test, yeah, there you go. But yeah, I'm sure that there are people who have different stuff like that, and it's really simple to do a lot of the stuff, and we're, our simple example here is going beyond just, what can be handled in the canvas in WebGL, and it's going to, okay, what can we do just in a browser more generally? What can we do outside of that? So building those types of chain reactions are pretty easy.
So,
Yeah.
I have a question. What exactly is a hippogriff?
Oh, a hippogriff? So this is from Harry Potter?
Oh.
Yeah, okay, Brent, I'll let you take this one.
So it's like a half horse, half griffin. Well, technically, 1/3 horse, 1/3 griffin, 1/3 like bird. Half bird, half horse. So
Well,
in the movie,
Well, it's half griffin, half horse, so Greek for horse comes from the root word hippo, so like hippopotamus is water horse, but so hippogriff is like horse griffin, so.
yeah. So
And a
in
griffin,
the
of
movie,
course, is a conglomerate animal too. So.
It's like there's a hippogriff named Buckbeak, and like Harry rides on him through the air, like by the water, and like then Draco Malfoy is like mean, and he like bites him.
Yeah, he gets
So
scratched
then-
a little.
He is almost executed.
Yeah, so one of the Harry Potter stories, the hippogriff is a pretty integral part of it, and then the Dementors are also from Harry Potter. They're the keepers of Azkaban, the
Who
guards
sucks
there.
souls out of people. I love Dementors.
Did you have a question, Eric?
yeah, what worked well pair programming with a the little one
Yeah.
project?
Well, I think in general, with trying to get kids interested in programming, you have to have something that's got a lot of quick feedback. So using Webpack, where I have so this is live, being served right now. So I can, npm run start, and it's automatically picking up the changes. So if we make a change, we see it very, very quickly. So that's crucial. And then the other thing is just kind of just checking, okay, do you understand what I'm doing? Or if I know I'm going to do something where it's not going to be very interesting, I say like, okay, I'm going to be doing this. Give me a minute, So, but then if there are things where I'm tweaking something a little bit, I'll show her exactly, okay, this is what I'm changing. This is why we're changing it. Now let's see what the result is. But yeah, to show the kind of instant feedback for things. What's something you want to change real quick, Bren? Did you want to show them that loop?
Oh yes,
Okay.
yes.
So here we just say true, and then that'll save. It's automatically, you can see it's already done
Okay, can I do it?
repackaging, and then it's actually already reloaded the game. So you get very fast feedback. So she's just going to stay there. Actually, how about you go up to the top of the sun?
Okay.
Okay. Just stay there.
Yeah, watch. It's gonna go up soon.
So eventually, it's going to start coming back more and
See?
more and more points. And eventually, it just becomes so many that it's just ridiculous.
You're gaining points more than you're losing.
Yeah. And that'll just increase, because every time you gain another sun, it basically sets up another regeneration loop.
See,
And
leveled
so
up.
if it creates a random, the first time it creates a random.
Now it's just going up
Yeah,
rapidly.
now it's going up so much faster. Yeah. But so let's say the first time it randomly picks 6 seconds. That means now every 6 seconds it's going to create one. But then as soon as you get one of
This
those,
is a new
it's going to say,
record.
okay, now create a new loop of, let's say, every 3 seconds. And that's going as well as at every 6 seconds. And so yeah, it'll just keep doing that.
Oh, look at
Yeah, so now it's to the point. It wasn't as dramatic in the beginning, but
This is a
it
record,
becomes
Dad.
exponential.
This
Yeah.
is a huge record.
Wow, Bren, you're really good at this.
Yeah, she rocks this game. She's ready to do some esports
Yeah.
stuff.
I'm already at like 200, level 200.
Yeah. But yeah, so definitely feedback is good. I've kind of contemplated, try to have her play around with Scratch some. Especially now, Scratch, you can use it with the Lego Mindstorms. I don't know how that works, but Scratch is another programming language where it's a block programming language, so it's more visually friendly for kids because you can see the things and move them. Yep, new record.
551.
Yeah. But with Scratch, it's also very sprite oriented. So has anybody here seen Scratch before?
Yeah.
Anybody not seen Scratch? Okay. Yeah, I'll say that for another time. But
It's beyond my.
yeah, but Scratch is another one where, just like here, you can set up your sprites. We have a sprite for the hippogriff, a sprite for the Dementor, and then you set up within that, you can set up different things for controlling its movement and things like that. Same thing with Scratch. You create a sprite, and then you tell that sprite, this is what your game loop looks like, and this is how you interact with the other things around you. This is how you can have interactions. So,
It's great
How long
experience
were you-
for her.
yes.
How long were your coding sessions?
I'm sure you can guess they don't last too long. I'd say in general, we do maybe, I'd say probably a long one would have been 20 minutes, but that would be a good, 5 to 10 minutes of just trying to remember, well, what was it we did last time? Because it's been a while. And then actually trying to do some things and experimenting. Sometimes what I would do is actually, because we'd go, I don't know, we started this probably, I don't know, actually I should probably look at the repo and just see, but I think it's been at least a couple years from when we first started it. and then when we tried to get back at it, it was like, okay, well let's, we'll plan to do it two nights in a row. And the first night we just kind of talk about, kind of remembering what it is doing now, and then trying to set some ideas of, well, what's the next thing we want to work on? And then I'd do some research, but I'd try not to actually do anything without her being able to see what it is I'm doing, so she can kind of, at least have an idea of how hard it is, because that's one of the things. You can ask a kid, what do you think's harder? Making a character on the screen jump, or think of something that just sounds complex, like I want to do an inner join on two tables based on a primary key foreign key relationship, and it's going to have a partitioned index across these. What do you think's harder to do? And I'm like, wow, that second thing sounds harder, but in reality, as people who are used to the tools and things out there, making a thing jump on screen, that's way harder than doing just a simple join on SQL, So it's all about your perspectives. And so that's one of the things I want to try to teach her is, what things are easy to do, what things are harder to do, where might you go to try to learn about something or to try something out, things like that. Any other questions?
Hey, Brennen,
What?
what was your favorite part about making the game?
I like the clouds.
Clouds.
She
So are
likes
they
the
coming
clouds.
back next?
Cause I could bounce on them. I was like,
Well, you didn't actually bounce on them. You
No.
pretended you bounced on them.
I was going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down.
Yeah. But it actually wouldn't be too terribly hard to, because it has the collision physics and the bounce and stuff like that. So you could actually have yourself interact with things like that. So.
Breakout plus mentors.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Yeah, great.
Anything else? All right. Thanks.